judges so severely were not ignorant pagans who had never heard of Abraham's God. Their own ancestor walked in the same family story. They belonged to the wider Edomite family, descendants of Esau, who lived around the region of Seir. Many of those relatives settled into life in the mountains, built towns, farmed valleys, and formed a more stable kingdom. Amalek's clan chose a different road. Instead of mountain towns and terraces, they pushed deeper into the south, into land most people avoided, the Negev and the Sinai wilderness, dry, rocky, unpredictable, hard to survive in. There, far from fields and city walls, Amalek's people learned to live by movement, not by planting. They became desert nomads. No permanent cities, no steady farmlands. They moved their tents, their herds, their families according to water, grazing, and opportunity. Over time, they mastered the landscape. They knew every spring, every hidden well, every narrow pass through the hills. They understood where rare rains filled dry riverbeds for a short time. This knowledge was power. It meant they could travel where others would die of thirst. It meant they could appear in places caravans thought were safe. It meant the desert itself worked in their favor, while outsiders stumbled and panicked. Their chosen territory was not random. The southern routes from Egypt toward Canaan and beyond ran right through or near Amalekite land. Merchants moving goods from Egypt toward the north and east had to cross zones that Amalek knew intimately. Any group escaping Egypt in the direction of the Promised Land would also move through those regions. Amalek positioned themselves exactly where vulnerable travelers would pass. They did not build fortresses. They built mobility. Their city was their camp. Their strength was speed. Because they did not farm and did not build trade centers, they needed another way to survive. They built an economy on taking what others produced. Raiding was not an occasional side activity. It became their main occupation. They watched roads. They tracked caravans. They waited for the moment when guards relaxed or when travelers spread out too far. Then they attacked with speed and surprise, grabbed what they wanted, and vanished back into terrain that only they understood. By the time victims regrouped or tried to pursue, Amalek's forces were gone, split across valleys and ridges that outsiders could not navigate safely. This lifestyle shaped their values. Boys grew up being trained as fighters. They learned to ride, to endure pain, to live on little food and water, to strike fast and disappear. Strength, daring, and ruthlessness brought respect. Successful raiders gained wealth in livestock, goods, and sometimes captives. Those who brought back the most spoils gained influence and often became leaders. Their culture rewarded aggression and scorned mercy. Why waste time tending crops when you could seize grain at harvest? Why build trade relationships when you could strip a caravan in one attack? Over generations, this mindset hardened. Work was for others. Taking was their way of life. Their place among surrounding nations was complicated. On one side were their relatives, the Edomites in the mountains. On the other side were the Canaanite city-states with walls, temples, and organized armies. The Amalekites stayed unattached. Sometimes they cooperated with Edom or Canaan when it suited them. A king might hire them as mercenaries to strike a rival. They might trade animals or information with nearby groups, but they did not become part of anyone's kingdom. They stayed independent, loyal only to their own chiefs and their raiding economy. Long before Israel ever marched out of Egypt, Amalek's presence in the south was already deeply established. In Genesis 14, during Abraham's time, the Bible mentions an area that later readers knew as the land of the Amalekites. Amalek himself was not even born yet, but Moses, writing centuries later, uses the name his audience understood for that region. That tells us something important. By the time of Moses, the Amalekites were such a fixed presence in those southern deserts that the territory itself carried their name. They had been rooted there for generations. Their identity as desert raiders was old and well known. Along with their presence came a reputation. People who passed through their territory feared them. Stories spread about surprise attacks, destroyed caravans, and villages stripped of food and livestock. They did not always hit the strongest targets. They often chose the weak points. Small groups, unguarded fields, unprotected camps. Other nations saw them not as
Yes,
partners,
Charlie, also.
but as a constant
Welcome to my
threat.
live stream. How are you doing today?
They
It's
were
been a
rarely
while.
invited into alliances of trust. They were tolerated when necessary, feared when near,
Oh,
and
Charlie, how are you doing
opposed
today?
when
It's
possible.
been a while.
The most disturbing part of their
Welcome to my live
reputation
stream.
was their
How's your day?
willingness to go after those who could not fight back. Many ancient warriors, even in brutal times, had some unwritten rules. Some would avoid attacking women and small children. Some gave enemies a chance to surrender. That did not make those cultures righteous, but it showed limits. Amalek crossed those lines. Vulnerability did not move them to pity. It attracted them. If a group was
Same good
tired,
tonight on
broken,
you.
and scattered, that was
I'm okay.
ideal for an attack.
I
That
was
is
like,
exactly what sets
my
the
day was
stage for
okay.
the moment that changed everything.
I just want to
Israel had
come
just
online
been brought out
from
of Egypt by
just shout to
mighty acts
somebody.
of
It's
God.
already 9 over here. So, what
Plagues
are
had
you doing?
struck Egypt.
What are you
The
doing?
Red
How do you
Sea
spend
had
your
opened.
time?
The same sea had closed on Pharaoh's army.
Hmm?
Now, this massive
And
army
Charlie,
of former
what are you
slaves
doing?
was
You know,
moving
it's
through the
like 3 days I
wilderness.
won't see you
They
around.
were not an army.
Or 2
They were
days here, I think 2
families
days ago, I was
carrying
here
their
around. I did
belongings,
my last stream. I didn't
leading
see
animals,
it's
still
good
learning
to
how
see
to live
you. So
free
what are you
and
doing?
how to trust God one day at a time. They reached a place called Rephidim. There was a serious problem: no water. The people were thirsty and desperate.
Charlie, are
Tension
you there?
rose.
What are you
They
doing?
argued with Moses. They
What are you
questioned
doing?
God's
Okay,
care.
there,
God responded with grace. He told Moses to strike a rock, and water flowed
I'm
out so the people
tired.
could drink. It was a fragile moment. The camp was tired, stressed, and still disorganized.
Oh yeah, getting ready for bed.
That
Okay,
was
that's
when
okay.
Amalek moved. Without any
So
record
should
of
I say good
provocation,
night?
the
Okay,
Amalekites launched an
get prepared
attack
for
on
bed.
Rephidim. Israel had not
I'm
invaded
still here.
their
It's already
cities. Israel had not
it's 2
raided their
a.m. It's
camps.
2 a.m.
They were simply passing through,
It's 4 a.m. over here.
struggling to survive
Close to
in the
5.
desert. Amalek saw not neighbors in need, but a
Sandwich.
scattered mass
Cool.
carrying
How are you doing?
possessions
Oh,
and
Sandwich, how are you
livestock
doing? You're
with
welcome to my
almost
live
no
stream. How are you
military
doing? Hope you're
structure.
doing fine.
To them,
It's good to have
this
you
was
here,
an easy
Sandwich.
target. They chose to strike.
Oh, Sandwich, I'm doing
Later,
fine. Oh, it's good
Moses
to have
would
you here.
describe exactly how they did it. He reminded Israel that
One
Amalek
love,
hit
one love.
them
Good.
on the way
How was your day,
when they were
Sandwich?
exhausted
How was your day?
and that they attacked those who were lagging behind.
Kuna,
That means the
kuneni,
elderly who could not
kunene.
keep up, the
One.
sick,
Okay,
injured,
Sandwich.
children
Are you
too
contact
slow to
create?
pace,
Oh, okay, I remember. Okay,
pregnant
now I
women,
remember.
those at the rear of
Kunene.
the
So how was
column.
your day? Thank you very
Amalek
much
did
for
not
being on my
line up
live
for
stream.
an
How was
open
your
battle
day?
against Israel's strongest men. They moved from behind, killing those who were least able to defend themselves. It was not only war, it was slaughter of the defenseless. Moses also added one more crucial statement.
Charlie,
They did not fear
yeah,
God.
going to sleep soon.
Amalek had heard what had
Okay,
happened in
Charlie,
Egypt.
okay.
News
If
traveled
you are going
through
to
the
sleep, I'm
ancient
going to
Near
wish you a
East.
good night's rest.
A slave nation
I will
set
love you
free.
rest.
A sea parted. An empire's army
I'm
drowned.
still on. I'm
The
still
God of
online.
Israel had shown
Like,
power no
go
one
to
could
sleep in the
ignore.
morning.
Yet
Always.
Amalek acted as if
Alright,
that
I have
God
anything
did not
doing.
matter.
One
They looked
Saturday
at a
is already
vulnerable
weekend over
people
here,
who
so
belonged to the Lord and attacked anyway. No
my day
respect,
was okay, Charlie.
no
You know, today's my
hesitation,
birthday. Like,
no fear of
it's
divine
already
judgment.
4th. 4th is my
They put
birthday.
their greed above the
So
clear
I'm
warning
just
of God's
just
mighty
out
acts.
here.
Israel had no
Us.
choice but to fight. Running
Charlie,
could
I
only
just
leave
woke
more
up.
weak
It's
people
6.
exposed.
It's 5.
Moses called
Yeah.
the young
Oh,
leader
Charlie,
named
I
Joshua
yeah, there in
and
South
told him to
Africa.
choose men.
Oh, thank
The
you.
wives who
Thank
faced
you for.
Amalek
How was your
fell back.
night? Hope you have a good night.
Joshua began to fight force out
Sandwich.
of ex-slaves. Men who
Charlie,
until recently had held bricks and tools,
I'm happy to
not
hear
swords.
the
While Joshua
like.
led the men
Okay.
on the field,
How was your day?
Moses
My day
went
was
up
okay.
onto a
Yeah,
nearby hill
today.
with Aaron and
It's
Hur,
already.
holding
I'm
in his
already on my
hands the
bed.
same staff God
Charlie,
had used with
are
Egypt
you
and
sent on?
at the
Are you
Red
on
Sea.
Instagram? This is your
During the
Instagram.
battle, something
I used to
strange
your
happened.
Instagram. You send the
As
Instagram.
long as
You did
Moses
send your
kept his
Instagram the other
hands
day.
raised with the
I
staff,
checked your profile picture. I
Israel
didn't see
pushed
anybody.
Amalek back.
So I said,
When his
okay,
armies dropped from
probably
exhaustion,
on IG.
Amalek
Though.
began to gain ground. The
If
outcome
you're
of the
on
battlefield
IG,
was linked to what
Charlie,
was happening on that
you
hill.
can drop your IG
When
and
Aaron and
or
Hur
probably
realized
drop
this,
your Twitter
they
and
gave Moses
I'll
a
check
place
you
to
out.
sit and
I
stood
see.
beside him,
I'll sit here.
physically holding
Upset.
up his hands when he could no longer do it alone. This continued until sunset. Under that covering of prayerful
One love
dependence on
sandwich.
God,
Yeah, very.
Joshua defeated Amalek's
Charlie
forces
said you
with
looking
the
good.
sword.
Yeah, Charlie have to
After
look
the
good.
victory,
Oh,
God spoke words to Moses that were
that's not
unlike
the major
anything
issue.
he had
Yeah,
said before.
Charlie, oh,
He told Moses
all
to
of
write
Charlie,
down half of the
you
scroll
did drop
and
your
make sure
IG. Are you
Joshua heard
Charlie?
it
Are you on
clearly.
IG or
Then
on?
God gave a verdict.
Are you on IG or
He
Twitter
himself
like
would
X?
wipe out the
You the
memory of
West
Amalek
or
from the
you're
earth.
on IG?
This was not just a
Let me
promise of
see.
one
Let me
more
check you
battle.
out because I don't know. You
It
didn't
was a
upload any
sentence
picture
over
of
an
your
entire
or
nation
your white
and its
sea.
future.
I'm
Their
not just talking
identity
to
as
a
a people
business
would be
person.
erased.
Oh
Their
wow.
name would
How
not
did you
become
spend your day
attached to
with
that southern
Charlie?
land,
And
would
sandwich, what
eventually
are plans
vanish.
for your new Saturday?
Moses built an altar to mark what God had done and gave it a name that declared the Lord as Israel's
Oh, and
banner.
Charlie, is that your
Then
IG?
he said that the Lord would be
Is that your IG
from
or
generation to
is
generation
that your IG?
because Amalek
Why
lifted
is she
their hand
asking
against the
the
purposes
question?
of
And
God
I'm
by
upset.
attacking his people. From that moment on, Amalek was not just another
Hello,
hostile
God
tribe
bless
in the
you.
desert. They were a nation
God
under
bless
a
you.
unique
Wow,
judgment.
I love that.
God had put their story on a timer. Yet the Bible shows that this judgment would not fall in a single day. Amalek would keep appearing, sometimes stronger than ever. And the next times they show up, their clash with Israel becomes even more intense. The next time Amalek steps onto the biblical stage, the situation is
So,
completely
Sandwich, what
different.
are your plans for today? What are your plans
Israel
for
is no
today,
longer a
Sandwich?
terrified group
You speak
fresh out of
essay.
Egypt. They
What
have
are your plans for
received
today?
God's law at Sinai. They have seen his glory on the mountain. They have a clear promise of a land ahead. But when they
You
reach
do
the
anything
border at
else for
Kadesh
Easter
Barnea
and
and
happy?
see how strong the inhabitants
You doing
are,
anything
the
else
fear
for
takes over.
Easter and happy
The
Easter?
spies bring back a
Yeah,
good
no,
report about the
like,
land, but a
oh, thank
terrifying
you, happy
report
Easter,
about the
dear.
giants and the fortified
Like,
cities.
nothing else for
Instead
Easter.
of
God,
trusting God,
today's my birthday.
the
It's
people
always for
decide they will
I'm
not
April
obey.
4th, so
They even
just
talk
only
about
think. I'm
choosing
only
leaders
focused on my
to
birthday.
take them back to Egypt.
But Charlie, you didn't answer my
God
question.
responds with judgment. That entire generation, the adults who
Are you on
refuse to obey,
IG or
will
you
not
are
enter the
on
promised land.
Twitter? Which of
They
them
will
are you?
wander in the
If you're on
wilderness
IG, drop your IG
until
handle
they
there.
die
I
out.
want to see it.
Only their children will
You're
inherit
always
the land.
welcome too. Thank you for
When the
being
people
welcoming
hear
me.
this, they
So
suddenly
Charlie, are you
spring
on
another
IG or your
direction.
Twitter? Let me see.
Now they want to fight. They tell Moses they will go up and take the land after all. But the moment has passed.
Just watching
Moses
some
warns them
documentary.
clearly.
I feel like
God is
upset.
not
Like I
with
feel
this
like
plan.
somebody's playing with me.
The Ark of the Covenant will not go with them. He tells them that if they go up now, they are going without God's presence, and they will be defeated.
Oh
They
yeah,
ignore the
okay.
warning.
Drop your WhatsApp number
In
there.
pride and panic, they
Drop your
march up
WhatsApp there.
toward the hill
I'll call you on
country,
WhatsApp.
trying to force entry into the land by their own decision instead of God's timing. This is where Amalek appears again. Numbers explains that the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in that hill region come down against them. Israel is pushed back and beaten badly, chased all the way to a place called Hormah. At Rephidim, with God's help, Israel had defeated Amalek while they were weak and inexperienced. Here, trying to fight without
Yeah, you
God's
can drop
support,
it there.
they cannot stand even with more time and more experience.
Or message.
Amalek
Yeah,
becomes
check.
a tool of judgment, proving that Israel's strength is not in
Check the
numbers or
IG.
weapons,
Check that WhatsApp.
but in obedience.
I is my
This
WhatsApp.
defeat sends a clear message. God's promise is real, but it cannot be grabbed on human Amalek's victory is not a sign that God changed his mind about their future destruction. It is a sign that he will not be used. Israel cannot walk in disobedience and still expect protection on demand. Amalek, the nation marked for erasure, is
So
allowed
you
to
get
win
that?
battle against God's own people because Israel chose their own will over God's word. Even in
Okay.
this, God is showing both justice and patience. The sentence over Amalek still stands, but the timing is his. As the years pass, Amalek's reputation remains alive in the region. When Israel approaches Moab near the end of the wilderness journey, the Moabite king, Balak, becomes terrified. He has seen what Israel did to other kings who opposed them. Instead of attacking directly,
Okay, all right, I'll test you on WhatsApp right now.
to curse Israel.
Let me share
Balaam
something.
tries several times,
Charlie.
moving from place to place, building altars, offering sacrifices, hoping to earn his pay by speaking a curse. But every time he opens his mouth, God takes control of his words. Blessing comes out.
You lay that number from there.
In one of these prophetic messages, Balaam looks toward different nations around Israel's path. When he sees Amalek, he speaks a short.
Yeah, you can't do that now. I'm doing it from here.
First among the nations, but says their end will be complete destruction. That phrase has been debated. It might mean Amalek was one of the earliest established peoples in that region, an old and rooted.
Okay, Charlie, you can delete it now.
Mean they were the first nation to attack Israel after the Exodus. Either way, the second half is crystal clear. Whatever their position now, their future is fixed. Total ruin. This is God, not an Israelite leader, confirming again that the Amalekite story will not end with survival.
So when are you going to sleep?
It will end with extinction. Time moves forward. Joshua dies.
When are you going to
Israel
sleep?
enters a new era, described in the book of
I'm
Joshua.
Charlene.
There is no king. The people drift in cycles.
Charlie, how old are you?
Turn to idolatry. God lets foreign powers oppress them. They cry out for help. God raises a deliverer. The land has peace. Then the pattern repeats. Amalek appears several times in this unstable period, always on the wrong side. They are never described as victims.
Okay, good. Thank you. I will check it out. I'm going to message you now.
Who hurt Israel. In the time of Eglon, king of Moab, Amalek teams up with Moabites and Ammonites to attack Israel. Together they capture the city of palms, most likely Jericho. Israel ends up serving Eglon for 18 years.
Okay, Charlie, now, because I have to get, okay, you have to get up very early. Okay, Charlie, good night to you. I want to have a good night, a good night's rest. It's good to have you. You know, before you came, I already did a live stream before now. So I want you to go and sleep. Tomorrow is another day. So, when you wake up, at least probably I will be doing a live stream in the afternoon. Today's my birthday, so I will do a live stream in the afternoon. So I want to go and sleep, okay, Charlie. Good night to you. This week, be blessed. Okay? Are you listening to me, Charlie? I want you to go and sleep, okay? It's very late. I want you to go and sleep. Let's go and sleep.
Together they form raiding
waves that Charlie.
Israel year after year.
Okay, good night. Thank you. Good night, dear God. Take care. I want you to go and have a good, lovely night rest. God bless you. God bless you for coming on my live stream. Have a lovely night's rest. Tomorrow, at least we're going to talk, okay? Right, tomorrow. I wish you a lovely night's rest. Go and sleep now, okay? You can go and sleep. Or I'm also ending my live stream, not like I have some few minutes to end the live stream. Just want to be while listening to some Bible stories and nothing much, okay? Just go and sleep. Good night. Have a lovely night's rest. Okay, Charlie.
Where there is vulnerability, Amalek is involved. They are not farming their own land.
Okay.
They are feeding off someone else's work. Their old pattern continues. Take what others produce, ruin what you cannot carry, leave the victims broken. This is the same spirit that attacked the rear of Israel's camp generations earlier. The targets have changed, but the heart of the behavior has not. In this desperate condition, Israel finally cries out to the Lord. God answers by sending a prophet to remind them why this is happening. They did not listen to God and turned to other gods. Then he calls a man named Gideon, who is hiding in a winepress while threshing wheat so the raiders
Good
will
night
not
to you,
see him.
Charlie.
God greets him as a mighty warrior and tells him he will strike Midian.
Good Jesse,
Gideon is
don't
unsure,
you sleep.
afraid,
You don't
feels
sleep.
insignificant.
You just say no,
God
like
patiently
you just say I
directs
just
his
want to
call
be
to
here.
his side.
Like
Then
I want somebody
God does
sleeping
something
now.
surprising.
Not in a good
When
mood.
Gideon gathers a large army,
Jesse,
God tells
I'm
him
in a
there
good
are
mood.
too
My
many
mood is
men.
not good.
If they win with these numbers, they may think they saved themselves. Through a series of tests, God reduces the army from thousands to just 300 men.
So Jesse, you wake up. So what are your plans? I know you're getting ready to go to work. Jesse, are you going to work today? And Jesse.
Divided into three groups, Gideon's men surround the enemy camp with trumpets, jars, and torches. At the
Are you going to
signal,
work?
they blow the trumpets, smash the jars, and shout. God throws the enemy camp into confusion. The raiders begin to turn on each other. Many die by friendly fire. The survivors flee in panic.
Okay, Charlie, good
Gideon and
night.
his men
Ready
pursue
to
across the Jordan, exhausted
be
but
safe.
still going.
So
They ask the towns of Succoth and Penuel for bread and are refused. The people there are afraid that if Gideon fails, the Midianite kings will punish them. Even without support, Gideon keeps chasing. He follows routes used by nomads, paths that men like Amalek's raiders knew well. Eventually, he catches up with the remaining forces.
you want to go and sleep? I'll go inside the room to go and sleep. Right now, I'm not sleeping. I'm just want. I'm talking to my sister. So I'm watching movie. You see, I'm watching movie. Oh, yes, I'm watching a movie. The movie I'm watching now is what keeps me awake. I won't say anything
They
like
choose a way of life that lifts violence, greed, and contempt for the weak into a cultural identity. They repeatedly place themselves on the side of those who oppose God's people. They keep doing this over generations, even as God shows his power over them more than once. And yet, despite all the clashes, the original sentence from Exodus has not been fully carried out. Amalek still exists. They still raid. They still appear.
That mark a nation permanently, transgressions so profound that even the Almighty himself proclaims, I will unleash such calamity that the ears of all who hear it will ring. This stands as the prophecy spoken concerning one individual, Manasseh, the monarch, who didn't merely tumble from divine favor. He pulled an entire realm into the void alongside him. Born amid the splendor of miraculous events, successor to a father who witnessed celestial beings annihilate armies, Manasseh would rise as the designer of Jerusalem's destruction. He transformed the Lord's sacred sanctuary into a dwelling place for demons. He caused the valley of Hinnom to reverberate with the anguished cries of children consumed by flames. His own offspring surrendered to deities crafted from stone and fire. And when the prophet Isaiah, speaking with the very voice of the Almighty, confronted him bearing truth, Manasseh commanded something so unspeakable it would be spoken of in hushed tones across generations. The prophet was cut in half, his lifeblood calling out from the earth. For 55 years, this ruler of shadows held power, and scripture itself testifies that his wickedness determined Jerusalem's destiny. Yet before passing judgment on this monster, listen to how his tale concludes. Because what the Lord accomplished next will demolish everything you believe about mercy and divine justice. To grasp who Manasseh was, you must first grasp the realm he received as his inheritance. His father, Hezekiah, stood among the most remarkable monarchs Judah had ever witnessed. The Bible reveals to us in 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 5, that he placed his trust in the Lord, the God of Israel, to such a degree that none could compare to him among all the rulers of Judah who came after, nor among those who preceded him. Consider the weight of that statement. Among every king who ever occupied David's throne, Hezekiah distinguished himself. When Hezekiah ascended to power, Judah existed in chaos. Idols occupied every space. The population bowed to counterfeit gods upon every elevation. The sanctuary that Solomon had constructed for the Lord had been sealed and abandoned to memory. Yet Hezekiah altered everything. 2 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 3, documents that in the opening year of his sovereignty, during the opening month, he unsealed the entrances of the Lord's house and made them whole again. He refused to waste a moment. Immediately, he assembled the priests and Levites together and instructed them to purify the sanctuary. The purification consumed 16 days. Picture what they discovered following years of abandonment. They removed all the refuse, all the false idols, everything that held no place in the dwelling of God. Then Hezekiah took a courageous step. He extended invitations to everyone throughout Judah and Israel to journey to Jerusalem for the Passover observance. Such extensive time had elapsed since anyone had properly honored Passover that people had nearly lost memory of the practice. 2 Chronicles chapter 30, verse 26 informs us that tremendous joy filled Jerusalem. For since the era of Solomon, David's son, king of Israel, nothing comparable to this had occurred in Jerusalem. But Hezekiah's work continued beyond that point. Following the Passover celebration, the population ventured out into the cities and began dismantling the idols with their own hands. They shattered the sacred monuments, severed the Asherah poles, and demolished the elevated worship sites where people had been honoring false deities. The entire nation burned with passion for God. Then arrived the trial. Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, made the decision to strike against Judah. The Assyrian military force stood as the most dreaded fighting power across the earth. They had already obliterated the northern kingdom of Israel and carried its inhabitants into exile. Now they encircled Jerusalem with a vast army. 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 13, states that Sennacherib advanced against every fortified city of Judah and captured them. One after another, the cities collapsed. Jerusalem awaited next. The Assyrian commander positioned himself beyond the walls and hurled mockery. He ridiculed Hezekiah's confidence in God. He informed the people that no deity of any nation had possessed the ability to rescue them from Assyria's might. Why would their God prove any different? Those standing upon the walls maintained their silence, but internally the terror proved genuine. They faced encirclement by 185,000 trained warriors. Hezekiah took the threatening correspondence he had received from Sennacherib and proceeded directly to the sanctuary. He laid the letter open before the Lord and offered prayer. His prayer stands recorded in 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 19. He declared, "So now, O Lord our God, rescue us, I pray, from his grasp, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may recognize that you, O Lord, are God alone." That very night, God provided his answer. 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 35. Documents what transpired next. And during that night, the angel of the Lord departed and struck down 185,000 within the Assyrian encampment. And when people rose at early morning light, behold, these were nothing but lifeless bodies. A single angel, a single night, the complete Assyrian force destroyed. When the inhabitants of Jerusalem awakened and gazed out from the walls, they witnessed nothing except corpses. Sennacherib gathered what remained and returned home to Nineveh, where his own sons murdered him inside his temple. This stood as the kingdom Manasseh would receive as inheritance, a kingdom that had observed God's might with their very eyes. Into this world of miraculous signs, and devoted faith, Manasseh entered existence. We discover from 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 1, that Manasseh had reached 12 years of age when he commenced his reign. If we calculate in reverse, taking into account that Hezekiah governed for 29 years, as stated in 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 2, Manasseh must have entered the world during the height of his father's rule, following the magnificent deliverance from Assyria. Envision what existence resembled for young Manasseh developing within the palace. Each day, he absorbed accounts about what God had accomplished. The attendants spoke of it. The priests discussed it. The entire nation conversed about the night when an angel eliminated an entire military force. This wasn't ancient history passed down through ages. This had just taken place. His father stood as the hero of the account. Manasseh matured, observing his father in prayer. He witnessed Hezekiah seeking divine guidance for every choice. He participated in the sanctuary services that his father had brought back to life. He listened to the Levites singing David's psalms. He observed the priests presenting sacrifices in accordance with the law given through Moses. Everything surrounding him indicated the God of Israel. The palace itself mirrored this devotion. Unlike the palaces of other monarchs that exhibited idols and foreign deities, Hezekiah's palace gave honor solely to the Lord. The young prince found himself surrounded by individuals who had observed firsthand what occurs when you place trust in God. These weren't merely stories handed down across generations. These were living testimonies from individuals who had witnessed these events personally. 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verses 27 through 29, portrays the wealth and recognition that came to Hezekiah. The passage states he possessed exceedingly great riches and honor, and he established for himself storage houses for silver, for gold, for precious stones, for... Imagine losing everything you love in a single day. Children, wealth, health, respect, everything, and yet lying on the ground, covered in ashes, with a wounded body and a shattered soul. A man lifts his eyes to heaven and says, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." This is the story of Job. But what most people don't know is that behind all that suffering, there was a secret never revealed, a deep mystery that goes beyond the losses, the pain, and the unanswered questions. Why did such a righteous man suffer so much? What was God doing in the silence? And what exactly did he say from the midst of the whirlwind? The Bible gives us hints, but the climax only arrives at the end, when the Creator himself breaks the silence and speaks to Job with a voice that shakes the earth and changes everything. The never revealed secret of Job. What God said to him in the whirlwind is more than a story of endurance. It is a revelation about the character of God, the nature of true faith, and what happens when heaven responds to human suffering. Join us as we dive into the journey of Job, a man who lost everything, faced the silence of God, and still remained faithful. Discover how true faith can endure even when heaven seems silent. In the vast land of Uz, where the days were marked by the scorching sun, and life flourished among fertile fields and abundant pastures, there lived a man unlike any other. His name was Job. He wasn't just an ordinary man with wealth or possessions. He was someone whose life drew the attention of heaven. Job was blameless, upright, and feared God. He shunned evil as one avoids poison, and his reputation was like a light shining in the moral darkness of his generation. There was no one like him on all the earth, and God himself would later declare it. Job was the father of 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. His children were close, and they often gathered for feasts, celebrations of life and fellowship among siblings. The daughters also participated, and everything was done with abundance, joy, and order. Yet even in these festive moments, Job remained watchful. After each cycle of banquets, he would rise early and offer burnt offerings on behalf of each of his children. He would say to himself, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This constant care reveals the depth of his devotion. His faith was not merely ritual, it was alive, committed, and filled with reverence. Job did not trust in his wealth nor in his own morality. He trusted solely in God and sought to please him even where human eyes could not reach the hearts of his children. Moreover, Job was an extremely prosperous man. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a large number of servants. His estate was vast, his influence extended throughout the region, and many considered him the greatest man of the East. But what truly set Job apart was not the extent of his possessions, but the purity of his heart. He was a man who walked with God. His name was synonymous with integrity. Job's life, from a human perspective, seemed perfect. A united family, constant prosperity, honor, respect, and a faith as solid as a rock. It was the kind of life many dream of, but few ever live. And yet, despite all this abundance, Job was never complacent. He remained reverent, fully aware that everything he had came from God. Nothing seemed out of place. His children lived in peace. His fields yielded without scarcity. His servants worked diligently, and Job's name was revered in Uz. If someone had asked at that time, "Who is the most blessed man on earth?" many would have answered without hesitation, "Job, the servant of God." However, there was something human eyes could not see. Something was moving beyond the earth, beyond the reach of sight. And that something wasn't an earthly problem, an approaching drought or a common illness. It was a conversation, a gathering in the heights of heaven, a dialogue no man witnessed, but one that would forever change Job's life. For even while Job offered sacrifices with a heart full of zeal for his children, a voice was rising before the throne of God, an accusing voice, a presence that still roams today among those who walk with God, seeking reason to destroy. At that moment, heaven was in motion, and while Job tended his animals, while his children feasted, while he knelt in silent prayer, the heavens were setting the stage for something far greater. Job's faithfulness was about to be tested, not because of wrongdoing, not because of hidden sins, but for something that surpassed all human understanding, a divine test. Job did not know. No man would know, but his life was about to become the center of a celestial dispute. His peaceful days would be interrupted. His dreams would be shattered. His faith would be pushed to its limit. And what was to come wasn't just pain or loss, but a deep revelation, a story that would span centuries and touch generations. The story of the man who feared God, the story of Job, and as we would later discover, the never revealed secret of Job. What God said to him in the whirlwind would not begin with answers, but with the silence that comes before the storm. But a conversation in heaven was about to change everything Job had ever known. At the very time when Job knelt before God, offering sacrifices for his children with a contrite heart, something grand and invisible was unfolding in the heavens. It was the kind of scene no human eye could witness, but whose consequences would echo on the earth. The Bible reveals that there was a day when the sons of God, celestial beings, came to present themselves before the Lord. And among them came Satan, the one who roams the earth, observing, searching, accusing. The Lord, sovereign and all-knowing, initiated the dialogue, "Where have you come from?" And Satan answered coldly, "From roaming through the earth and walking back and forth on it." It wasn't merely a geographical response. It was an insinuation. He had been observing humanity, looking for faults, measuring intentions. And then God, with full confidence, mentioned a name that resounded between heaven and earth. "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him, blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Satan's response was bold, almost sarcastic. "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." It was a direct challenge to Job's faithfulness. Satan claimed that Job's faith was bought with blessings, that he was only faithful because everything was going well. It was an accusation not only against Job's integrity, but indirectly against the very character of God, as if the Lord needed to purchase devotion through prosperity. Then God, with authority and wisdom beyond all understanding, allowed the test to take place. "Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." With those words, a trial was sealed in heaven that would shake the earth. Satan departed, authorized to touch everything Job owned, his wealth, his servants, even his children. Only his life was to be spared, and so began a battle that could not be seen with the eyes, but would be felt with the whole soul. An invisible challenge with profoundly real consequences. A righteous man would be tested, not for his faults, but for his faithfulness. An innocent man would face losses that could break even the strongest. Satan wasted no time. He descended to the earth with a clear mission, to prove that Job's faith was conditional, and to do that, he would use every weapon of human suffering. Nothing would be spared. While Job still slept, perhaps dreaming of his children, of his sheep grazing safely, or the laughter of another family feast, the gears of destiny began to turn in a dark direction. Heaven was silent, but something had shifted, not out of God's cruelty, but because of a greater purpose, a plan that men would not understand immediately, a secret that would only be revealed at the end of a long journey. The never revealed secret of Job. What God said to him in the whirlwind began there in the echoes of a heavenly agreement. God trusted Job, and now that trust would be tested like gold refined by fire. And Job, he knew nothing. He still offered sacrifices, still walked with God, still lived with integrity. But a shadow was drawing near. An ordinary day was about to become the darkest day of his life, and so began the greatest trial a righteous man has ever faced. The day began like any other. The sun rose over the hills of Uz, casting a golden light over the fields that belonged to Job. His servants tended the cattle, the sheep grazed peacefully, and Job's children gathered at the home of the oldest brother for yet another banquet. Job, as was his custom, maintained his quiet routine of reverence to God. Perhaps he was already preparing the burnt offerings he would present the next day, as he always did after his children's feasts. Everything seemed in perfect order, but what Job did not know was that this would be the last day of his former life. Suddenly, a servant came running. His face was drenched in sweat, eyes wide, breath broken, all signs that something was terribly wrong. "My lord," he cried, "the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby when the Sabaeans attacked. They took the animals and killed the servants with the sword. I was the only one who escaped to tell you." Before Job could even process those words, another man rushed up, even more desperate. "Fire from God fell from the heavens, Job. It burned up the sheep and the servants with them. They're all dead. I alone escaped to tell you." Job's face was already filled with confusion and pain, but he had no time to react, for a third messenger appeared, trembling, his eyes filled with terror. The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties. They swept down on the camels, took them all, and killed the servants. Once again, I alone escaped to tell you. It was as if the earth itself had turned against Job. 3 tragedies, 3 irreversible losses. His wealth, his livelihood, his stability, all in ruins. But it wasn't over yet. The final messenger arrived. He didn't run like the others. He staggered. His face was pale, his eyes full of tears, his voice broken by sobs. He stood before Job, unable to speak for a moment. "Your children," he finally said, his voice trembling. "Your children were together at the oldest brother's house. A powerful wind came from the desert. It struck the 4 corners of the house, and it collapsed on them all. No one survived, my lord. They're all gone. I'm the only one who escaped." Job's world shattered in that moment. Nothing could have prepared him for this. No prayer, no fasting, no sacrifice could soften the weight of that pain. Job had lost everything, his servants, his wealth, his livelihood, and now his children, 10 children, 10 lives that embodied his future, his blessing, his joy, all gone in a single day. The pain didn't come in waves. It came like an avalanche, an unrelenting devastation, a storm that swept away everything. Nothing remained. And Job, the most righteous man on earth, the faithful servant who feared God, he fell to his knees, he tore his robes, a deep symbol of mourning. He placed ashes on his head, plunging into the purest expression of grief and humiliation. But what he did next would astonish both heaven and earth. Job worshipped, yes. In the midst of destruction, he bowed down and worshipped. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Job did not curse. He did not complain. He did not accuse God of injustice. His wealth was gone. His servants were gone. His children were gone. But his faith was still there. Wounded, but alive. Yet, in the invisible realm of heaven, Satan watched. The first blow had not broken Job's soul, but the war wasn't over. The storm had barely begun. The full story had yet to unfold, and the shadows were now preparing an even crueler strike. But would Job still hold on to his faith? And for how long? Before we continue, we ask for your support. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to strengthen us and help us keep spreading these deep stories from the Bible. Now, let's continue with the anguish, the questions, and the never-before-revealed secret of Job. The last messenger had gone. The echo of his words still lingered in the air, as if pain itself continued to speak even after the silence. It was a heavy silence, thick as stone, a void that filled every corner around Job. No voices, no cries, no sounds of servants, no bleating sheep or lowing oxen. Only the wind brushing against the walls of the house, a house now empty of laughter and full of memories. Job remained motionless. His gaze was fixed on the ground, as if the earth might offer some kind of answer. But there was no answer, only dust, ashes, and absence. The absence of his children, the absence of his workers, the absence of the abundance that had once marked every inch of his life. In just a few hours, everything was gone. And with it, something within Job began to break, not his faith, but his emotional foundation. He rose slowly, as if carrying the weight of the world on his back. His feet touched the ground unsteadily, as though the earth that had once sustained him had collapsed under the weight of tragedy. With slow, trembling hands, he grasped his tunic and tore it from top to bottom, a sacred sign of mourning, an ancient custom to express what the heart could no longer scream. Then he knelt down. He picked up a handful of ashes from the ground and scattered them over his head. Ashes, the symbol of the end, of what has been burned, of what cannot be restored by human hands. The greatest man of the East was now just a shadow hunched on the ground, cloaked in dust. But it was there, on that cold, dirty ground, amid dried tears and burning memories, that Job did something no one expected. He bowed, not in despair, but in worship. Yes, worship. Job fell to the ground and worshipped God. With a voice choked by pain, yet full of reverence, he spoke words that would echo through centuries, marking the soul of all who have ever
Lift your hearts, yeah. Thank you, big Uncle Fly. Daddy Bird is asleep. No, I'm not asleep. I'm here. Oh, man, good time. Well set here too. Nephew Art, okay. Good night, big Uncle Fly.
It was more than a statement. It was a surrender. Job didn't say it as someone resigned to fate, but as someone who knew that God remained God, even when everything was taken. His faith didn't depend on the presence of
Big Uncle Fly, I sent you a message. I don't know if you saw the message, and I don't know if you got the reply to the message. Go check it, and if you get a reply to it, you kindly reply to the message, okay?
A faith that can still praise when everything else is silent. Job did not complain. He did not question. He did not point a finger at God. He worshipped. And that's why Scripture records, in all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Job 1:22, in heaven the angels watched in awe. The throne of God received the purest praise, praise born from pain. And the accuser who had bet on Job's collapse now saw a man in ashes, yet still standing on the inside. The never revealed secret of Job was still hidden, sealed in the heavens. But it had begun to take shape, forged in the fire of trial. It was a secret that couldn't be understood by words alone, but had to be lived in the soul, chapter by chapter. Job didn't know what was happening in heaven. He didn't know about the heavenly council, nor about the challenge that had been issued. All he knew was the pain that burned in his chest and the faith that endured the storm. For any man, this would have been the end. But for Job, it was only the beginning. For although the enemy had failed to break Job's faith through loss, he would not back down. He was determined to go further. If wealth and children weren't enough to bend the righteous man, he would now strike Job's very body. There would be another meeting, another permission, another wound. But Job's suffering was only just beginning. While Job was still lying on the ground, covered in ashes and broken by the losses that had shaken his life, a new scene was unfolding in the heavens. For the second time, the sons of God, celestial beings, presented themselves before the Lord. And once again among them was Satan. God, who knows all things, needed no report. Yet he asked, "Where have you come from?" Satan replied with the same coldness as before, "From roaming through the earth and walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord once again spoke Job's name with pride. "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil, and he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without cause." Satan's response dripped with contempt. Skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life. But now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. It was a new challenge. The enemy acknowledged that Job had passed through the fire of loss and remained faithful. But he believed that if Job's body were afflicted, if he were consumed by physical pain, he would finally curse God. And once again, God allowed it. "Very well, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life." With that permission, Satan came down to earth in fury, and without delay, Job's body became a field of torment. Painful sores broke out across his skin. Open ulcers covered him from head to toe. The itching was unbearable. The wounds became infected, and the stench of diseased flesh spread around him. Job, the most respected man in the East, was now a spectacle of suffering. Too weak to walk, he left the house and sat among the ashes in the ruins of all he had left. He picked up a piece of broken pottery and used it to scrape his wounds, trying to relieve even a sliver of the consuming pain. The scene was devastating. A body destroyed, a heart already shattered, a mind trying to make sense of it all. And in that moment, perhaps the most vulnerable of his life, he heard the voice of the last person he expected, his wife. She approached and, seeing Job's miserable state, could no longer contain her outrage. What she saw wasn't just a suffering man, it was the collapse of everything she believed in. "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." Harsh words, sharp as blades. She didn't speak only in anger. It was the cry of someone who could no longer bear the pain of the one she loved. Perhaps it was despair itself speaking through her. But the blow was cruel. In his greatest moment of need, Job heard not comfort, but a sentence: "Give up." But even there, amid pain, scorn, and loneliness, Job remained steadfast. "You speak like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" Job 2:10. Job did not curse. He did not rebel. He did not abandon his faith. He knew that his integrity did not depend on blessings. And though his body was in ruins, his soul was still anchored in God. Heaven's eyes were still upon him. The never revealed secret of Job had yet to be spoken, but every step of his journey brought him closer to God's answer. Job was alive, wounded, but alive, and more than that, faithful. But now suffering would take another form, an invisible one, deep and silent. If his body had already been struck, something even harder to bear was coming: loneliness and judgment. 3. Friends were approaching, not with healing, but with accusations. His body was wounded, but now the blow would strike the soul. Job was still there, sitting among the ashes, his body covered with sores and his soul wounded from within. The pain was constant, but the silence around him seemed to amplify the suffering. The wind whistled through the ruins, and the stench of open wounds mingled with the dust of despair. It was hard to recognize in that man the one who had once been the greatest of the East. News of the tragedy had spread, and when it reached the ears of his closest friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, they decided to go to Job. It wasn't a short journey. Each came from a different land with a clear purpose to comfort and encourage their friend in his suffering, but nothing prepared them for what they saw. From afar, as they neared the land of Uz, they spotted a bent figure cloaked in dust and darkness. For a moment they doubted it was him. The image was so disfigured, so far removed from the man they once knew, that they struggled to believe it was really Job. When they finally recognized him, they couldn't contain their emotion. They cried out with loud voices, tore their robes, in mourning and threw dust on their heads. That pain was not Job's alone, it was theirs too. In the face of such misery, words felt useless. So they chose to do the only thing they could. They sat beside him on the ground and remained there 7 days and 7 nights, without saying a single word. It was a heavy silence, full of respect, but also fear. They saw greatness fallen, a life undone, a righteous man destroyed, and they couldn't understand it. No explanation made sense. No argument seemed sufficient. Before the pain that radiated from Job, even comfort felt fragile. During those days, Job didn't move. He scratched his wounds, sometimes gasped in pain. His eyes were fixed on nothing, as if his mind drifted between memories and unanswered questions. Perhaps he remembered his children laughing, his wife beside him, the peace that once filled his home. All of that now felt distant, like a dream that fades upon waking. The silence of the friends wasn't out of disdain. It was the silence of those touched by someone else's agony. But it was also the silence of those beginning to think, and as we'll see later, think too much. They watched Job, judged with their eyes, interpreted with human and limited hearts, and gradually their minds began to form theories about what could have caused such a righteous man to fall so low. For now they said nothing, but they thought a lot. Job, in turn, felt every glance. Even without words, he could sense the weight of their presence. He knew they were friends, but he also knew that silent judgment was beginning to take shape. It was as if his pain was now being observed, analyzed, dissected. In those 7 days, the deepest wound Job carried was no longer on his body. It was in his spirit. Heaven remained silent, his friends mute, God invisible, and Job's soul empty. There were no answers, no comfort, only questions. So many questions. Why, God? What did I do? Why such suffering without cause? The physical pain was excruciating, but the silence of the silence was more cruel. It echoed inside Job like an endless abyss. 7 days, staring into nothingness, trying to understand the unexplainable, waiting for an answer that never came. Until, finally, something changed. On the 8th day, Job broke the silence. And what came from his mouth wasn't a greeting, nor a soft lament. It was a cry of anguish, a release of long-held pain. He did not curse God. He would never do that. But he did curse the day he was born. And now the words began to flow. Words from a wounded heart, from a man who still trusted, but could no longer contain the agony, until Job finally spoke and broke the silence with a cry of anguish. The silence had been broken, and not with light words, but with a deep cry rising from Job's wounded soul. After 7 days without uttering a single sentence, he opened his mouth, not to defend himself, nor to seek comfort, but to release the weight of a pain overflowing inside. Job's words did not accuse God. They were not blasphemous, but they revealed the agony of someone who no longer saw purpose in his own existence. May the day of my birth perish, and the night it was said, a boy is conceived. It was a cry for erasure. Job didn't just wish to die. He wished he had never existed. He wanted the day of his birth wiped from the calendar, that the night when his life began in the womb had never happened. This was not the voice of a man rebelling against God, but of someone in deep despair, overwhelmed by the immensity of his suffering. Job could not understand. How could a man who had always pursued justice, who feared God in all things, be thrown into such calamity? He continued, why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? It was a sincere confession. He wasn't cursing the Creator, but he was cursing his own origin. Each word was like a breath of pain, finally given voice. Job no longer wanted to continue. He saw no reason. To him, life had lost all meaning. In his speech, he idealizes death as a place of rest, a relief for those who suffer. He speaks of kings, counselors, princes, servants, and captives, all of them resting equally in the grave. There, he says, the wicked cease their troubling, and the weary find rest. Job's pain was so deep that even the stillness of the dead seemed more desirable than the continuation of his days. Why is life given to those in misery, and life to the bitter of soul? Here he goes beyond his personal story. He questions the meaning of human suffering. Why allow someone to be born if their life will be marked only by tears? Why sustain the existence of someone whose only companion is anguish? He didn't know it, but these questions would echo through generations, because every human being at some point faces the shadows of despair. And Job's words reveal that even the most righteous can fall into anguish. That to feel pain is not a sign of sin, but of humanity. Job ends his speech saying that his sighs are his food and his groans pour out like water. He is consumed by fear, anxiety, and uncertainty. What I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, but only turmoil. His cry was the outburst of someone who couldn't understand why all he had feared had now become reality. And though he didn't know it, this moment was necessary, because before God could speak, Job needed to empty his soul. And in that emptiness, the truest parts of him began to emerge. But every word Job spoke made more room for that divine revelation to come. All appearances had to fall away. Only essence could remain. And it was at that moment, after the cry of the soul, that his friends finally rose. For 7 days they had kept silent. But now, feeling ready, or perhaps thinking themselves wise, they began to speak, and what was meant to be comfort became confrontation, and so his friends began to speak. After Job's anguished cry, the 7 days of silence came to an end, and the first to speak was Eliphaz the Temanite. His tone was calm, almost respectful, but his words were loaded with judgment, like an arrow disguised as advice. If someone ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? But who can keep from speaking? Eliphaz began by reminding Job that he had once been a source of guidance and strength for many, that he had taught, corrected, and supported the weary. But now that he was the one afflicted, Job faltered. It was as if he was saying, "You helped others, but can't apply your own advice to yourself." And then came the first accusation, still veiled. "Consider now, who, being innocent, has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed?" Eliphaz was insinuating that Job had, in some way, sinned. After all, according to his logic, no one suffers without a reason. The doctrine of retribution, the belief that the righteous are always rewarded and the wicked always punished, was the foundation of his argument. He then shared a spiritual vision he had at night, something mysterious and terrifying, claiming that man cannot be righteous before God, that not even angels are pure in the Creator's sight. He puts no trust even in his servants, and he charges his angels with error. With this, he cast guilt upon Job under a cloak of spirituality, as if to say, "Who are you to think you are righteous?" In the next chapter, Eliphaz continues with more advice, now in a harsher tone. He claims that fools suffer because they despise God's correction, that punishment is part of divine discipline. He even prophesies that if Job humbles himself, he will be restored. Blessed is the one whom God corrects, so do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. In other circumstances, such words might sound wise, but for a man who had lost everything without apparent cause, who was covered in sores, sitting in ashes, and who could find no fault in himself, those words were like salt in an open wound. Eliphaz offered no compassion, only judgment. He judged based on appearances, human logic, and what he could see. He didn't understand that Job's suffering was the result of something greater, a divine test that transcended the laws of cause and effect. His words, which should have brought comfort, became spears. Job, already weakened, now had to bear the weight of accusation. The comfort he had hoped for from his friends had turned into an even heavier burden. It was as if, on top of all his physical and emotional pain, Job now faced a new kind of suffering, the spiritual pain of being misunderstood. Those who came to comfort him were, in fact, digging his sorrow even deeper. And yet, Job did not lose his voice. He listened to Eliphaz in silence, but his soul burned within. He knew his suffering was not the result of hidden sin. He knew his heart was upright before God, and for that reason, he would not remain silent, hidden behind the accusations, the misplaced counsel, and the human attempts to explain the unexplainable. Job still had something to say. He would not remain silent. He had something to say. Job listened to everything Eliphaz said, every word, every insinuation, every pious argument laced with judgment. And when he finally opened his mouth, it wasn't with anger, but with pain, a deep pain, mixed with the sorrow of being misunderstood. "Oh, that my anguish were weighed, and all my misery be placed on the scales. It would surely outweigh the sand of the seas." He began his outburst by acknowledging the depth of his suffering. He didn't ask for pity, but for understanding. His pain was so heavy, so vast, that he couldn't measure it. And what hurt him most wasn't just the loss, but the fact that his friends, instead of comforting him, had judged him. A despairing man should have the devotion of his friends, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. It was both a reminder and a rebuke. Job was saying plainly that even if he had turned away from God, which he claimed he hadn't, he still deserved compassion. But his friends instead came at him with doctrine, as if his suffering could be solved with religious formulas. He compared their words to the force of a dried-up river, deceiving those who come to drink from it. His hope for comfort had been crushed. Then Job turned to God. He recognized the greatness of the divine, but he also expressed his confusion. What is mankind that you make so much of them, that you give them so much attention? It wasn't just a question of curiosity, but one of desperation. Why would a God so grand focus so closely on such a small creature? Why monitor every step, allow such suffering, bring so much testing? And then came his most sincere cry. If I have sinned, what have I done to you, you who see everything we do? Why have you made me your target? He didn't understand. He never claimed to be perfect, but he saw no guilt in himself that could justify such pain. It was as if he were being struck for reasons unknown to him. His heart was laid bare before God. But Job didn't stop there. He continued his defense, now confronting the logic of his friends with even greater boldness. Indeed, I know that this is true, but how can mere mortals prove their innocence before God? He acknowledged that no one is righteous before God by their own merit. He knew the greatness of the Creator was immeasurable. God could move mountains, blot out the sun, stretch out the heavens, all beyond human comprehension or questioning. And still, Job felt the desperate need to present his case. He longed for someone to stand between him and God, someone to mediate the pain, to make sense of the suffering. If only I knew where to find him, if only I could go to his dwelling. Yet in the midst of the confusion, Job's faith showed signs of astonishing strength. Even wounded, even misunderstood, even confused, he trusted. And in one of the most profound moments of his speech, he declared, "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him." That phrase proved that Job's faith was not driven by reward or protection. He was saying, even if I die by God's own hand, I will still trust him. A faith that doesn't demand explanations, that survives the silence, that endures even without guarantees. But the judgment hadn't ended, and Job knew it. His words fell like stones into still waters, and instead of listening, his friends were readying themselves to strike back. What was meant to be a conversation would become a courtroom, and the evidence would be Job's wounds. And while God's response had not yet come, human suffering dragged on amid questions, pain, and long speeches. But the judgment of his friends would continue, more cruel with every word. Job's words, though deep and sincere, did not stir compassion. On the contrary, they provoked even harsher reactions. The second friend, Bildad, lacked the tact or moderation of Eliphaz. His approach was blunt, leaving no room for doubt. If Job was suffering so much, it was because he had sinned, and probably his children had too. How long will you say such things? Your words are a blustering wind. Bildad implied that Job's words were empty and meaningless, like the wind. To him, God does not pervert justice. If Job's children had died, it was because they had sinned. And if Job was now facing misery, the only solution was to seek God sincerely, which, in Bildad's mind, meant repenting of hidden sins. If you are pure and upright, even now he will rouse himself on your behalf and restore you to your prosperous state. Bildad's argument was based on a simple theological logic. God rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. Therefore, if Job was suffering, it must be his fault. And if he didn't admit it, it was out of pride. Job listened and responded. With sorrow in his soul, he cried out again. He did not deny God's justice, but he saw no guilt in himself worthy of such suffering. And so, once again, he lifted his voice to heaven, not to complain, but to plead, "You know that I am not guilty, and that no one can rescue me from your hand." He asked why God had formed him so carefully, like a potter shaping clay, only to now crush him. Where was the mercy? Where was the meaning? But before any compassion could arise from his friends, the third one, Zophar, stepped in. And with him, the harshness reached a new level. Zophar was the most aggressive. He said Job talked too much, that his words were empty, and that if God truly treated everyone with exact justice, Job would be getting less than he deserved. Zophar said, "Oh, how I wish that God would speak, that he would open his lips against you. Know this, God has even forgotten some of your sin." It was cruel. Zophar not only assumed Job was guilty, but claimed he deserved even greater punishment. And then, like the others, he offered false hope. If Job repented, his life would be restored. But Job had nothing to repent of. He knew his integrity before God. The speeches continued. Eliphaz returned, then Bildad again, and even Zophar repeated his judgments. It became a cycle, an informal courtroom where the three friends took turns condemning the innocent. They quoted old proverbs, personal experiences, popular sayings. They spoke of the fate of the wicked, the prosperity of the righteous, of how God humbles the proud and exalts the humble. And always, always, they insinuated, "Job, you did something, confess it." Their logic was relentless. Suffering is proof of sin, but they were wrong. Their logic did not reach the heavens, because this test was not punishment. It was purpose. And this story was not about guilt, but about trust. Job, increasingly broken inside, began to distance himself from the arguments of men. He realized he would find neither justice nor compassion in their words, and so he began to cry out for something greater. "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth." It was the voice of a faith that refused to die. In the midst of accusation without mercy, Job lifted his voice with conviction. He believed that someone, the Redeemer, would rise on his behalf. Someone beyond his friend's logic, beyond a religion without compassion, beyond human judgment. It was as if Job was saying, "You do not understand me, but God does, and he will answer." By now, Job no longer expected answers from men. He longed for something that would come from above, something that would break heaven's silence. Job, now weary, began to cry out for something beyond human logic. Job was tired, not just of his body, his wounds, or the painful memory of his lost children. He was exhausted from the empty logic of his friends. From their cold explanations, their judgments disguised as counsel, tired of their insistence that his suffering was the result of some secret sin. He knew he had walked in integrity, and his conscience remained clean before God. That's why, after another round of accusations, Job raised his voice, but now no longer to men. His cry was directed upward. It wasn't a typical prayer. It was a cry for justice. Listen carefully to my words. Let this be the consolation you offer me. He was simply asking to be heard, that for once they would silence their conclusions and let him speak. And then Job began to confront the theology of his friends with the reality he saw. Why do the wicked live on, growing old and increasing in power? It was a piercing question. Job looked around and saw wicked men prospering. He saw the unrighteous living in peace, amassing wealth, raising children in safety. They mocked God and still seemed blessed. Their homes were secure, their herds multiplied. So where then was the immediate justice his friends so confidently preached? They say to God, "Leave us alone. We have no desire to know your ways." Even while rejecting the Lord, these men thrived. Job couldn't understand. His life of reverence, of sacrifices, of integrity had been crushed. Yet the wicked, who didn't even acknowledge God's hand, lived in abundance. How could this be explained? The logic of his friends collapsed in the face of the reality Job described. Does God judge every person immediately in this life? Is the wicked always punished? Is the righteous always spared? These questions burned in Job's heart. He wasn't trying to offend. He was trying to understand. It was a cry that didn't come from rebellion, but from a wounded, honest faith that dared to ask because it still believed. Job's faith was different from that of his friends. He wasn't trying to defend God with neat phrases. He wanted to find God. He wanted to speak with him, to look into his eyes if possible and say, "Here I am. Answer me, tell me why. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat." That line is one of the highest expressions of human sincerity before God. Job longed for an encounter. He wanted to present his case before the Lord, like someone standing in a courtroom, not to challenge authority, but to seek clarity. I would state my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would find out what he would answer me and consider what he would say to me. He didn't want to fight. He wanted to understand. The silence of God was what troubled him most. It wasn't just the suffering that hurt. It was the absence of an answer. But if I go to the east, he is not there. If I go to the west, I do not find him. When he is at work in the north, I do not see him. When he turns to the south, I catch no glimpse of him. It was as if God were everywhere and yet nowhere. Job searched for him, but couldn't find him. And yet, even in the whirlwind of pain and confusion, he declared, "But he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I will come forth as gold." There it was again, a faith that refused to die. Job didn't understand, but he trusted. He knew he was being tested, and he still believed something good would emerge from it, that his pain had purpose, even if it remained a mystery. He continued, speaking of how wicked men oppress the needy, exploit the weak, hide in darkness. Job saw human injustice and what seemed like divine delay, and that anguished him even more. Why does the Almighty not set times for judgment? Why must those who know him look in vain for such days? Why don't those who walk with God receive clear signs of his justice? Why the silence? Why the waiting? Job still hadn't heard the voice he longed for. His friends continued accusing, and heaven had yet to speak, but the heavens remained silent. God's silence still hung over the story. Job had poured out everything that was in his heart. His friends had confronted him with harsh words, taking turns in speeches that, though filled with wisdom, only sank him deeper. And then the debate stopped. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar fell silent. They had run out of arguments. They couldn't convince Job, nor did they know how else to accuse him. Job, in turn, no longer listened to them with the same interest. He was exhausted, and it was in that silence, between pain and weariness, that a new voice rose. His name was Elihu. Until then, he had remained quiet. He introduced himself as a young man, younger than the others, and had waited his turn out of respect for the elders. But now, stirred by a holy restlessness, he could no longer remain silent. I am young in years, and you are old. That is why I was fearful, not daring to tell you what I know. Elihu spoke with humility, but also with conviction. He said that it is the spirit God places in a person that gives wisdom, not age alone. True understanding comes from the breath of the Almighty. He did not address Job first, but the three friends, and he rebuked them. He said that despite all their many words, they had failed to refute Job. Worse, they sought to condemn him without proof. There is no one among you who refutes Job, yet you condemn him with your words. Then he turned to Job, and with a tone of correction, but not of offense, he began to shed light on something the others had not considered, that suffering may serve purposes beyond punishment. Why do you complain to him that he responds to no one's words? Elihu suggested that God does indeed speak to man, through dreams, visions, even physical pain, but not always in the way we expect. Sometimes suffering is a form of discipline, redirection, or preservation of the soul. For God does speak, now one way, now another, though no one perceives it. He did not claim that Job had committed great sin, as the others had. But he warned God is just. If he allows pain, it is not without purpose. It may be to prevent something worse, to teach, to reveal something deeper. Suffering, then, was no longer punishment, but a process. Elihu exalted God's greatness. He declared that God is perfect in knowledge, just in all his ways, and that no one can judge him. But he also reminded them that God does not despise man. He desires good even when he corrects. God is mighty, but despises no one. He is mighty and firm in his purpose. Elihu tried to show that God is not indifferent to human pain, that he is sovereign, yes, but also attentive, that Job's suffering was not abandonment, but perhaps an invitation to a greater revelation. How great is God, beyond our understanding. The number of his years is past finding out. Throughout his speeches, Elihu used creation as illustration. He spoke of clouds, thunder, rain. He pointed to the heavens and said, look at the greatness, look at the mysteries, look at how man does not understand, yet lives beneath these wonders every day. It was as if he was saying, Job, maybe God won't explain everything right now, but he is at work. Even if you don't understand, trust him. Elihu didn't offer exact answers, but he offered something new, hope with reverence and humility with confidence. His words didn't wound, they awakened. They were firm, but not cruel, direct, but not humiliating. Unlike the others, Elihu wasn't trying to prove anything. He was pointing to God, not as a judge, but as a teacher. And then, at the end of his speech, he exclaimed, "The Almighty is beyond our reach and exalted in power. In his justice and great righteousness, he does not oppress." He ended with reverence, placing God in his rightful place as absolute, as sovereign, but also inviting Job to recognize him as the one beyond human understanding. The air felt heavy. Elihu's words lingered like the prelude to something great. Heaven was still silent, but not for long, because thereafter, the young man's voice, when the last human argument had faded, came the whirlwind, and when it ended, the whirlwind had come. The sky was heavy. After long chapters of pain, accusations, and desperate searches for answers, the silence was finally broken. Not by another human opinion, not by a new theological argument, but by something no one expected. A storm, a whirlwind, began to form on the horizon. It was no ordinary gust of wind. There was power, there was glory, there was awe in that movement of the heavens. Nature seemed to awaken before the invisible presence of the Creator. Lightning split the sky. The wind howled among the rocks, and the ground trembled beneath the feet of men. And then God spoke. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. The words of the Most High came from the heart of the storm. It was as if the universe itself bowed to the voice of its Creator. There was no longer room for theory, speculation, or debate. Now, God himself took center stage. But what he said was unexpected. He did not begin with comfort, nor with explanations. He did not justify Job's suffering, nor reveal the behind the scenes of the heavenly challenge. Instead, God asked a question. Who is this that obscures my counsel with words without knowledge? It was not an angry rebuke, but a firm correction. God was not saying that Job had sinned, but that his perspective was limited. He spoke with the voice of one who sees the whole, while men see only fragments. Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. From that moment, a series of questions fell upon Job, like a torrential downpour of wisdom. But they weren't questions seeking answers. They were questions meant to reveal divine greatness and human smallness. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Each word came with the weight of creation. God asked about the dimensions of the earth, the foundations of the world, the boundaries of the sea. He spoke of the dawn, the depths of the ocean, the place where light is separated from darkness. Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? It was as if the Creator were drawing back the veil of existence, inviting Job and all of us to look not at the pain of life, but at the majesty that upholds everything. God spoke of the storehouses of snow, the constellations, the laws of the heavens. Name by name, image by image, he exalted his own work, not out of pride, but to awaken reverence. He spoke of rain that falls in the desert where no man lives, of the raven that cries for food, of the mountain goat giving birth, of the wild ox that refuses to be tamed, of the ostrich that forgets her eggs on the ground, of the horse that neighs in battle, of the hawk that soars high in the sky. Every detail of the universe was recalled. and each one carried a message. Do you know these things, Job? Do you understand how it all works? It was not humiliation, it was revelation. God didn't answer Job's questions with explanations. He answered with presence. He didn't tell Job why he was suffering. He showed Job who he is. And in doing so, the very weight of pain began to shift. Because in the immensity of the Almighty, even suffering changes its place. Not because it stops hurting, but because it becomes enveloped in something greater, divine majesty. Job had heard many voices. The voices of his friends were full of judgment. Elihu's voice was full of conviction, but the voice from the whirlwind was full of glory. Word by word, the Creator painted with questions a new vision of the world, of mankind, of faith. There, among thunder and wisdom, Job did not receive explanations. He received something greater, the revelation that God is in control, even when everything seems to fall apart. That faith doesn't need answers, it needs surrender. The whirlwind spun around Job, but inside him something was beginning to grow still. The storm still roared. God's words continued to echo from the whirlwind, but now it was no longer merely a display of power. It was a revelation. What was being said to Job was more than a simple answer to his questions. It was an invitation to behold something infinitely greater. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? That question was only the beginning. From there, God unfolded a majestic procession of rhetorical questions, all designed to lead Job to a single place: humility before the glory of God. God did not reveal to Job the conversation with Satan, nor explain why he had allowed such suffering. He said nothing of tests, nor of heavenly secrets, but he did reveal what Job needed most to see: God himself. He spoke of the constellations, the commands of heaven, the cycle of rain, dew, and frost. He pointed to the behavior of animals: the lion, the raven, the mountain goat, the wild donkey, the wild ox, the ostrich, the horse, the hawk, the crocodile. Each creature, with its habits and mysteries, served to show something greater. God is in everything, and everything is under his control. Who has put wisdom in the inward parts? Or who has given understanding to the heart? It was as if the Creator was saying, Job, you don't need to understand everything. You just need to trust me. The never revealed secret of Job, what God said to him in the whirlwind, was exactly this: not an explanation, but a revelation. God owes no man a report of his ways, because he is God, sovereign, perfect, infinite, and we are clay in his hands. But what makes this secret so special is that it doesn't humiliate, it transforms. It doesn't put man beneath God simply to crush him, but to place him in his rightful position, where he can see more clearly, with reverence and trust. Job stood before something no other man had experienced in quite that way: a conversation with the Almighty. Not to be answered, but to be shaped. God continued, shall the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Finally, Job begins to respond. But his words are different now. There is no more defense, no more demand for justice. The man who once cried out for explanations now stands in silence. Behold, I am vile. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand over my mouth. Job was beginning to understand. His pain was still real. The losses were still present. But something within him had changed. He no longer needed to know the reason for everything, because now he knew who God was. But God wasn't finished yet. He continued, describing the strength of Behemoth and the ferocity of Leviathan. Grand, powerful, fearsome creatures. Creatures man cannot control, yet they live under the watchful eye of their Creator. His breath kindles coals, and a flame comes out of his mouth. In the end, the message was clear. If Job could not control or comprehend these creatures, how could he judge the ways of God? Job had shouted, pleaded, questioned, and God responded, not with justifications, but with presence. The climax of this story is not a logical explanation, but an inner transformation. The secret that had never been revealed was this: God does not need to be explained. He needs to be revered. And true faith is the kind that bows, even when it doesn't. Understand, Job's faith had been pushed to the edge. He had lost everything, been wounded in body, crushed in soul, judged by friends. And now, surrounded by the whirlwind, he found not the end of pain, but the beginning of a new vision. The never revealed secret of Job. What God said to him in the whirlwind was that man does not live by answers, but by trust. And before the majesty of God, even suffering finds its place. But what would Job say at the end of it all? The storm had passed. The whirlwind that had carried the voice of God now gave way to a different kind of silence. It was not the silence of absence, but of reverence. A silence full of meaning, where words were no longer necessary because the art understood. Job, who had spoken so much, now simply bows. No more defenses, no more justifications, not even lamentations, only acknowledgement. I know that you can do everything, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Job 42:2. Job's first words after hearing the Creator are a powerful testimony. He no longer speaks as a wounded man, but as one restored from within. His pain had not disappeared, it was still there, but now it dwelled in a heart shaped by something greater than human logic, the presence of God. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. These words carry the essence of the entire story. Job, the upright, faithful, worshipping man, now knew God in a completely new way. He no longer knew him only through rituals, blessings, or tradition. He had seen God, not with physical eyes, but with the eyes of the Spirit, with a heart awakened by revelation. This is the greatest transformation of all, to see God in the midst of pain. Job acknowledges his limitations. He admits he spoke of what he didn't understand, questioned without knowledge, and now he repents. Not a repentance for moral sin, but for trying to measure God with a human ruler. Therefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. There, in the same dust and ashes where he once sat in mourning and pain, he now repents, not for weeping, but for demanding to understand what is mystery. And it is at this moment of deep surrender and humility that restoration begins. God then turns to Job's friends. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar had spoken arrogantly, attributing to Job guilt he did not have, and God rebukes them. My wrath is aroused against you and your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Remarkably, God defends Job. Even after all that happened, even after the complaints and questions, the Lord affirms that Job spoke sincerely. His pain was real, his heart was honest, and that to God is more valuable than correct speeches empty of compassion. Then God commands the friends to offer sacrifices, but that alone is not enough. They would need Job to pray for them. Yes, but do the one who was unjustly accused now becomes the intercessor for those who wounded him with their words. My servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept him. And Job in his humility prays for them. This scene is as powerful as the whirlwind. The man once wounded now heals. The one who suffered in silence now intercedes in mercy. And it is in this moment, when Job prays for those who hurt him, that something wonderful happens. And the Lord restored Job's fortunes when he prayed for his friends. God reversed the captivity. He changed the scene. He altered the destiny, and not only restored Job, but blessed him doubly. Everything Job had lost, and flocks, riches, dignity, was returned and multiplied. He had more children, lived many more years, and saw 4 generations of his descendants. But more important than all of this, he saw God, the never revealed secret of Job. What God said to him in the whirlwind was not an explanation, it was an encounter. Job's pain was the path to something far greater, the revelation of God's character, his sovereignty, and the beauty of a faith that endures even without answers. Job was restored outwardly, but before that he was transformed inwardly. He didn't just get back what he had lost, he gained a new dimension of faith. The story ends in peace, but it is a different peace than at the beginning. There, Job was upright and prosperous. Here he is upright and broken. There he had heard of God. Here he knows him by sight. And that is the greatest reward anyone could ever receive. We have reached the end of Job's journey, one of the most moving, mysterious, and transformative stories in all of Scripture. A path marked by devastating loss, divine silence, deep questioning, and ultimately, an unshakable encounter with the God who speaks from the whirlwind. What do we carry with us as we close our eyes and remember everything Job endured? We carry the certainty that true faith does not demand all the answers. Yes, Job wanted to understand. He cried out for explanations. He felt lost, wronged, misunderstood. And God did not condemn him for that. God listened. And in the right time, he responded, not with justifications, but with his presence. The greatest revelation was not a why, it was a who. The never revealed secret of Job. What God said to him in the whirlwind was not a divine formula or spiritual code. It was the recognition that God remains God, even when the ground vanishes beneath our feet, even when his voice seems silent. Job teaches us that suffering doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always have a visible cause, but it is never beyond God's reach. There is a greater purpose, even if hidden. And sometimes the very process of pain becomes the stage where faith is refined. We see this when Job, in the height of his misery, still worshipped. When he tore his garments, poured ashes over his head, and declared, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. We see this when, even wounded inside and out, he refused to curse his Creator. Shall we accept good from God and not accept adversity? We see this when, even after being confronted, he prayed for his friends, and it was in that prayer that restoration began. Ultimately, we see that Job's greatest victory was not material restoration. It was inner transformation, humility before glory, reverence before mystery. And this is the lesson that remains for you and me when everything seems to fall apart. God is still in control. When heaven is silent, he still sees us. When the whirlwind swirls, it is there, inside it, that he speaks. The secret of Job was never hidden. It was being revealed chapter by chapter, tear by tear, until, at the peak of his pain, God showed that what matters most is not understanding, it is trusting. And when we trust, even without explanations, even without answers, the whirlwind ceases to be a symbol of chaos and becomes the place where the voice of God finds us. Just like Job, maybe you are in the middle of loss, doubt, or long silences. But remember, God still speaks, God still reigns, God still restores, and even in the whirlwind, he is present. If you were touched by this story, 2 more videos will appear on your screen featuring biblical characters who also faced deserts and divine revelations. Click to watch, subscribe to the channel, and leave a like. May God speak to you, even if it's from the midst of the whirlwind. To follow one of the most touching and transformative stories in the entire Bible, the journey of a young disciple who heard God's call and decided to pay the price with his body, with his soul, with his heart. Over the course of 10 exciting episodes, we'll dive into the story of Timothy, the son of a nameless woman, the young man who suffered for the love of the mission, the disciple who remained silent in the face of pain, the man who became Paul's right-hand man, and the leader who learned to love even in moments of rejection. Prepare for tears, confrontations, challenged faith, and redemption. This is not just a story about courage. It's about real faith, about the price of obedience, and about how God transforms anonymous people into pillars of faith. Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and follow each chapter of this unprecedented series that will touch your soul and change your perspective on calling. This is the story of Timothy, the story of a heart that chose not to turn back. Chapter 1. The young man who heard the voice of the Apostle Paul. He grew up among whispered prayers and ancient promises, a son of a Jewish mother and a Greek father, rejected by some, ignored by others. But one day, while carrying a bucket of water, a voice called his name. It was not his mother's voice. It was not the voice of the synagogue elders. It was the voice of an apostle, and with it came a calling that would change his life forever. But before leaving on his mission, Timothy had to face something no one expected, a demand that involved not only faith but pain. It wasn't enough to follow Paul. It was necessary to sacrifice his own flesh. And it all began with a question. Are you ready to walk? Who was this quiet young man whom God was secretly preparing? What did he hear from Paul's lips that changed everything? And why did he need to be wounded before proclaiming healing? In this true and moving story, you will discover the moment Timothy heard the voice so many prayed to hear, and what he had to surrender to obey that call. The house where Timothy grew up stood on the corner of a dusty street in the city of Lystra, a city forgotten by many, but not by God. Located in the region of Lycaonia, part of ancient Asia Minor, it was a simple place, surrounded by barren hills and an almost always clear sky. The house was made of rough stone and clay, the roof covered with dry branches, the walls marked by time. There was no beauty to human eyes, but there was reverence within. In this house lived 3 lives united by faith. Lois, the grandmother, was a woman of prayer, wise from time and loss. Eunice, the mother, was steadfast with serene eyes and calloused hands. And lastly, Timothy, the son who listened more than he spoke. From a young age, his presence was quiet, but he carried an inner strength that only heaven could perceive. They had no material wealth. Their clothes were sewn by hand. Their food came from their own labor, and the walls creaked with the evening wind. But what sustained that house was invisible. Faith, hope, and a silent expectation that God still worked among the simple. Timothy did not know his father as he knew his mother. His father was a Greek, someone distant from the faith perhaps, present in the beginning, but absent in the family's soul. Only his name and the memory of a face faded by time remained. The boy grew up between 2 worlds, the firmness of Jewish tradition and the emptiness of his pagan heritage. It wasn't easy, but God had planted something in him that no culture could erase. From a very young age, Timothy listened to the teachings of the Torah with impressive respect. His grandmother spoke of Moses, Elijah, David, men who spoke with God and obeyed even without understanding. His mother read aloud the texts of the prophets, and he listened to every word as if it was spoken just for him. Even without knowing it, he was being molded. Every story was a seed, every prayer a calling. But despite the routine of faith and obedience, something within Timothy was restless. While the hills of Lystra remained immobile, something in his heart stirred. He saw the other young men playing, making plans, talking about trade, marriage, or land. But he wanted more. He didn't know what. He only knew that that life, however right it might be, was not the end. Lystra in itself was a portrait of oblivion. Its dirt roads, its silent squares, its predictable markets, everything seemed to go in circles. The elders repeated old stories, the merchants discussed the same prices, the flocks followed the same trails. It was a city that lived, but didn't. Dream, that breathed, but didn't hope. But Timothy hoped. At night, lying in silence, he looked at the clay ceiling and listened to the sound of the wind blowing through the bricks. He closed his eyes and imagined what it would be like to hear the voice of God, not just through the scriptures, but directly, like the men he admired in the ancient texts. Does the Lord still speak like that? He wondered. Does he still call the little ones? This restlessness was his secret prayer. No one knew, but he spoke to God when he carried water, when he lit the fire, when he watched the fields. His silence was not empty. It was sacred. The neighbors respected him. The community leaders knew of his conduct. It was not common to see. A young man with such reverence, such purity. He was not exalted, but he was constant. And that was enough for God to look at him attentively. And it was in this setting that eternity began to stir. There was no thunder, there was no lightning, but in the midst of the monotony of Lystra, a different man appeared. A man with marks on his body, visible scars, intense eyes. His name was Paul, and with him came a voice, not just of teaching, but of mission. Timothy didn't know it yet, but that man carried within him an answer he had long awaited. But something was about to interrupt this silence. Paul had arrived. With his deep eyes, his firm voice, and his body marked by persecution, he did not seem like an ordinary man. And indeed, he wasn't. Wherever he went, he left traces of faith, division, and conversion. And now he was there, in Lystra, precisely in the land where a young man for years had been formed in silence. But before any encounter, it is necessary to return to the root. Timothy's faith wasn't built in squares or synagogues. It was built at home. It was in the hands of Eunice, his mother, and in the firm words of Lois, his grandmother, that he learned to fear God. Without fanfare, without applause, just faithfulness. From a very young age, he listened to the texts of the law, recited the Psalms, and knew the promises of the prophets. It wasn't an obligation, it was life. His father's absence accompanied him like a subtle shadow, a Greek, indifferent to faith, distant from the mission. Timothy didn't see him as an example. His name was present, but his spirit was not. And perhaps it was this absence that further strengthened his attachment to the two women who raised him. Eunice never spoke with bitterness. She never poisoned her son's heart against his father. On the contrary, when Timothy asked Mother, why didn't he stay? She simply replied, because some leave, so that God has room to draw closer. Lois, more direct, would say, God never builds on cracked foundations, but he can even use the shards to make something new. Timothy listened and kept it to himself. He was always more of a listener than a talker, but within him a flame grew, a thirst that not even knowledge of the scriptures could quench. He felt there was something more, a purpose perhaps, a mission. He was respected in the synagogue. The elders praised his posture, his purity, his constancy. The other young people, however, didn't understand him. They said he was too serious. But Timothy knew it wasn't seriousness. It was preparation.
Goddess, why you said that?
Fully understanding.
And Goddess.
Eunice noticed her son's eyes.
Oh, here goes your king. It's been a long time. How are you doing? It's good to see you on my live stream. How are you doing? No, since the last time I will see you again. How are you doing? Hope you are doing fine. Hi, King.
In the days that followed, Paul's presence began to impact the city. He didn't just preach, he burned from within. He spoke of Jesus, the Messiah, as one who had known him face to face. He spoke of grace, repentance, salvation. And with that, hearts began to tremble. The city, which had always lived in repetition, now heard something new. Timothy listened to every word from afar. He didn't approach yet, but something inside him cried out. That voice, there was something about it. It carried the same weight he felt when he read the prophets. It was as if that voice were a continuation of what his mother and grandmother had always preached. That afternoon, returning from the well, he asked his mother, Mother, If God wants to use me.
King, are you still there? Yeah, there, say hello.
She placed her hand on her son's shoulder and said firmly, "You won't know completely, but when the voice comes, you will recognize it." What if I'm not ready?
King, you didn't remember to say
If he
happy
calls
birthday
you,
to Occupy.
It's because you already
Big
are.
OG King.
Timothy swallowed hard. His heart beat fast, for no apparent reason, or rather for a reason he couldn't yet name. That night, lying on his mat, he looked once more at the clay ceiling. He felt that the waiting time was running out. What was once a seed now blossomed. What was once preparation now demanded action. And then came the moment that would mark the beginning of everything. But the faith planted by them would flourish in a land that no one expected. And with him came a divine answer to the silence that Timothy had kept in his chest for so long.
We know.
But before
Yes,
the
no.
answer manifested itself, Timothy needed to face the biggest battle, the one that resided within him. Since childhood, he had known he was different, not because of talent, not because of appearance, but because of origin. The faith he carried connected him to his mother, but the blood that ran through his veins connected him to his father, and with him a distant land, an absent belief, a silence that had never been filled. He was half Jewish and half Greek, and this placed him daily between two worlds. In the synagogue, there was respect, but never complete acceptance. The more traditional ones looked at him cautiously. They never said it clearly, but it was as if they were thinking, "Good boy." But his father, Greek. At home, however, Eunice never allowed that look to define him. "You are a son of the Most High, Timothy, and that is worth more than any earthly lineage." Even so, there were times when he felt between two worlds, like someone who didn't completely belong anywhere. One afternoon, while helping Lois organize the small garden, he blurted out the question that had been hammering in his chest for some time. "Grandma, can God call someone divided like me?" She wiped her hands on her apron and answered firmly, "God doesn't call pure blood. God calls whole hearts. And yours has been his for a long time." But even though he heard this, there were days when the doubt returned, when he crossed paths with the disapproving looks of the more rigid ones, when he heard the comments about his Greek heritage, when he remembered his father as absent from his life as from the scriptures. Even so, Timothy remained faithful, not out of pride, but out of love. What he learned from his mother and grandmother was too vivid to be ignored. He continued praying. He continued studying the sacred scrolls. He continued waiting without even knowing exactly what he was waiting for. Meanwhile, Paul continued preaching in Lystra. His presence cut through the air like a sword. His words touched depths that not even the synagogue leaders dared to touch. He spoke with pain, with power, with truth, and that shook the city. Timothy began to listen more closely. He sat in the shadows, listening to everything, and the more he listened, the more he felt that voice stir something ancient within him. It wasn't just a sermon. It was as if each word were building a bridge between the two worlds that lived inside him. One night, after hearing another message about repentance and the grace of Christ, Timothy returned home with watery eyes. Eunice noticed. "Is everything all right?" "I am. I'm just different." She came closer and hugged him without saying anything else. A mother who sometimes understands what her son cannot explain. In the following days, something changed. He felt it upon waking, while walking through the streets, while touching the earth. It was as if he were being observed, not with judgment, but with purpose. And then it happened. Paul entered the house of a known believer, and after some time in prayer, turned to one of the local men and said, "Tell me about the young man named Timothy. He is the son of a faithful Jewish woman, but his father was Greek. I want to meet him." And so at the end of that afternoon, Timothy heard his name called out loud by someone outside for the first time. "Timothy, the apostle wants to see you." He stopped. The bucket of water he was carrying trembled in his hands. His heart pounded. For a moment, all the thoughts of his childhood, all the doubts, all the fears resurfaced. Would he really be called? With this past, with this divided blood, he wiped his hands, took a deep breath, and walked on. Before we continue, we ask for your collaboration. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to bless us and continue bringing these profound stories from the Bible to more hearts. Now we continue with Timothy's journey of faith, the young man who heard God's voice in the silence of Lystra. Timothy didn't know what to expect. He had never been summoned by someone like Paul. That simple sentence, "The apostle wants to see you," seemed to echo in the corners of his soul. The way to the house where Paul was staying was short, but his steps felt longer, heavier. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum. The streets of Lystra were bustling that afternoon, not because of commerce, nor the arrival of some Roman official, but because of Paul. Wherever he went, eyes turned towards him, some with admiration, others with doubt, others with fear. His reputation as a preacher, missionary, and even survivor of persecutions preceded him. But amidst so much attention, it was his gaze that fell upon Timothy. When Timothy entered the house, he saw a tired man with a steady gaze and serene expression. Paul was sitting in the shade, surrounded by some brothers. He didn't look like someone seeking honor or attention. He looked like someone carrying a weight, a calling that both ached and burned. Paul raised his eyes, and when he fixed them on the young man, time seemed to stop. "Are you Timothy?" "I am, sir." "I've heard of you," Paul said without preamble, but with warmth in his voice. "Your faith is well known. Your life is a testament. But tell me, are you ready to walk?" Timothy swallowed hard. That wasn't a typical question. It wasn't about where he lived, what he did, or who his father was. It was about something much deeper. "Walk where?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Where the gospel leads you, where the kingdom needs you. Walk with me, but above all, walk with the Lord." The silence that followed seemed sacred. The room, previously filled with murmurs, grew quiet, and it was in that moment that Timothy heard the voice that changed the wind. It wasn't Paul's voice. It was the voice within him, a voice that didn't come from his ears, but from his soul. It was as if everything he had lived up to that point, Eunice's teachings, Lois's stories, the solitary prayers, converged at that exact moment. The answer he had been searching for so long didn't come in the form of an explanation, but of direction. Yes, he wanted to go. Yes, he wanted to follow. But with that, fear arose. Am I worthy? Paul seemed to sense the inner battle and spoke gently, "If the Lord calls you, he will equip you." It's not about deserving, it's about obeying. That day, for the first time, Timothy felt peace within his division. The son of a Jewish woman and a Greek man raised between two worlds, he now understood. God wasn't calling him in spite of that. God was calling him because of it. He would be a bridge. He would be an answer. He would be part of something that began long before him and would continue long after. As he left the house, the wind blew differently. The city was still the same, but Timothy was no longer the same. He knew something had changed. But before, leaving with Paul, before beginning the journey, something still needed to be addressed, and Paul knew it. In a more private conversation, he explained, Timothy, there is something you need to do, not for salvation, but for love of those we will reach. You are the son of a Greek, and among the Jews, this can be a stumbling block. The young man understood immediately. His heart tightened. Are you asking me to prepare, to give up, to sacrifice for the love of the gospel? He lowered his eyes. He felt the weight of the decision. It wasn't just a spiritual choice. It was something that would stir his flesh, his dignity, his past. And yet, he didn't hesitate. And it was to himself that that voice wanted to speak. Even knowing that Paul's request involved pain, embarrassment, and renunciation, he didn't ask for time to think. He just lowered his head and said, if this is necessary to avoid causing offense, I will do it. Paul saw that and remained silent for a few moments. It was as if something within him was confirmed. The young man's firmness didn't come from the flesh. It wasn't pride nor haste. It was surrender. Later, while talking with the local brothers of the community, Paul heard even more about Timothy. One of them said, since he was little, this boy has been different, quiet, but attentive. He never strayed from the faith, even with his father absent. Another added, when many young people sought the ways of the world, he sought the ways of God, even with doors half witnessing the unfolding of a mystery so grand it touches the depths of the human soul. At the height of the exile, when Israel felt abandoned and lost, God chose Ezekiel to be the channel for messages that would unveil hidden secrets of the divine. In the shadows of despair, he was led into visions that defied understanding, skies torn open by lightning, indescribable creatures that defied logic, and a radiant throne declaring the supreme power of God. Through overwhelming experiences, Ezekiel encountered the sacred and bore the weight of judgment. Each vision carried a riddle that pointed to redemption, a promise of renewal that transcends the present and illuminates the future of Israel and all humanity. His calling was not only to warn of impending punishment, but to proclaim a path to restoration, where pain would be transformed into hope and despair would give way to salvation. In this video,
I was listening to some Bible stories, and I have to go into meditation. I don't know if people want to write something, write
glory. The messages of Ezekiel echo as an invitation to discover a new beginning, where the presence of God rewrites the destiny of those who dare to believe. Join us as we dive into the most mysterious visions of the Bible, where Ezekiel,
I've been here for some time. I know when
was
we
called to proclaim judgment,
in that say
but also
it's
to reveal the redemption that springs up even from the rubble. Get ready to see the impossible become a promise. The stones of the Chebar River burned beneath my feet. The cruel sun of Babylon showed no mercy, and the silence of the exiles was heavier than the chains of slavery. I was a priest by heritage, but there, far from the temple and the land of my fathers, my voice had fallen silent.
I was listening to the
No
Bible
offering,
story and I
no
have to,
altar,
I have to
only
fall
desert
asleep.
dust
Before
and the
everybody was
echo of
bored,
a
so
golden
I have to
house.
sleep again.
I sat among the elders,
Like it.
our faces covered in shame. We waited for something, though we did not know what. The river, muddy and still, mirrored our stagnant souls. Then the sky broke open. There was no warning, no thunder, no sign. A violent wind swept through the camp, lifting tents, scattering jars, making women scream and children hide. But it was no ordinary wind. There was a presence within it. My body froze. I looked up and saw. The firmament tore open like a ripped veil. It wasn't a cloud. It wasn't lightning. It was a rupture, a tear in the fabric of the world. Through the rift, something descended, something no human eyes had ever seen. A thick cloud, wrapped in swirling fire, glowing like molten metal.
Go back and sleep, like
figures began to emerge.
I'm listening to a Bible story, yeah, right now, so I can sleep anytime. If I want to sleep, I'll go back to I'll go to the room. If I want to sleep, I'll go to the room to go and sleep. Right now, I'm just, I Pepe, your son, my friends. Just,
and their movements were like flashes of lightning. They did not turn as they moved. They went wherever the Spirit led them, swift as the blink of an eye. And with them were wheels, but not ordinary wheels. These were wheels within wheels. When they turned, they did not veer. They moved in any direction without swerving. And the wheels were alive. Their rims were tall and terrifying, covered with eyes all around. Each eye looked at me as if it knew me, as if it could pierce my soul and dig up secrets I no longer remembered. As I watched, I realized the wheels moved with the creatures. The spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. Above
yeah, I
them,
can
an
listen
expanse
to
like
everything
the
I'm
purest
listening to
crystal
here.
stretched out
You're
like
not
the
going to
sky.
understand.
And above that expanse was a throne. And on the throne, a figure. It looked like a
Oh,
man,
you know,
but
it's
it
not
was not a
everything I have
man.
to
From
explain.
the waist up,
Yeah,
was
it's just my
fire.
mood for the
From the
moment.
waist down,
Okay.
blazing flames. And around him, a radiance like a rainbow on a rainy day, the glory of the Lord. I fell face down. My bones trembled. I didn't know if I had died or if I was still myself. Then I heard a voice. Son of man, stand up. I have
Yeah,
something
that
to
you
say
can
to
hear,
you.
like, this is
It was
Ezekiel.
not the
This
voice
is
of
this is
a
about
man. It
Ezekiel.
was like the roar
All
of
listening to
rushing
Ezekiel
waters,
stories, like,
piled up thunder.
that's what I
It
was doing.
engulfed me, and I stood, even without strength, even without knowing if I still lived among the living. Before me, the figure extended something.
I have to drop
A
talk
scroll.
to
It was
like
covered
sleep
in
a little
laments,
and wake up.
weeping and woe. It was a living book as if it pulsed with pain. And he said to me, eat this scroll, feed on it, fill your belly with it. Without questioning, I opened my mouth and I ate. I expected bitterness.
Hope you get
but it was
better
sweet as
soon.
honey.
Can't hear
Still,
you,
tears ran
but
down
it's
my
okay.
face. The sweetness
I don't understand what I'm saying. Like, I was listening to a Bible story, like, after the Bible story, like, I always have to wait for, I always, sleep only took me just like few minutes and come back again. It's still more, it's not close to more, it's not time for me to sleep. Like, I still got 1 hour to go and sleep. I always try to leave the live stream running. I'm like, all about that. I was listening to the Bible story.
I had no choice. A spirit took hold of me, lifted me among the flaming wheels, and the sound was like the roar.
I was listening to the Bible story, so boy, you can hear me. Fuck.
My body on earth, my
Yeah.
soul between worlds. I saw the exiles, but I also saw the throne. I saw the dry bones of the people. I saw the holy city covered in filth. I saw priests.
Look at what I was watching and back.
I saw the temple, my temple.
I'm not sleeping with God. Oh God. I'm not sleeping with God. You sleep with the car. Ah, Big Uncle Fly. I sent you a message. I don't know if you read my message. I sent you a message. I don't know if you read my message. Hope you read my message.
But what I saw next was even more terrifying. The light vanished. I was lying face down, gasping for breath. The ground trembled beneath me, but the sound of the wheels was no longer.
So I shouldn't sleep again. Like, I just dropped up to sleep. You're asking me, oh. Uncle Fly said, Uncle, yeah, I was listening, like, I have to meditate. You understand? Sometimes when you listen to these Bible stories, like takes you like for meditation, you can just be sleeping and you wake up again. And I also woke up, I saw some few showers, but I was here like at least same much. I was here, but I have to draft off in the sleep and wake up again. That is it.
I was called to confront the
So
people who did not
sometimes I
want to
need it,
listen,
you know.
but who needed to be warned.
I need it.
And before I could speak a word, he extended a scroll to me. This is what you shall speak. I took the scroll. It was inscribed on both sides.
Oh, I need it in life, you know.
And woes, laments
Like,
that seemed alive.
I'm not
The
sleeping
Lord
straight.
said to me,
Like,
Son of man,
he would say, well, Uncle Fly, you know, I'm not sleeping straight. Like, I have to start. It's normal. It's normal. What do you think about that? If nothing wrong with a nap, yeah, like what happened? I was listening to a Bible story and I dropped off to sleep and I woke up again. If I'm going to sleep, I won't be waking up again. Like,
I was a watchman of judgment.
I don't like explanation. Too much explanation. My head is filled up. My head is filled up. Like,
turn their faces away. I had to
my head is filled up.
speak as if their souls depended on it, because they did. The Spirit lifted me. I was taken without walking. The glory of the Lord enveloped me like a whirlwind. Behind me, I heard the sound of the creature's wings colliding.
Yeah, that is what thing. Like, if I was sleeping, I wouldn't be waking up. Like, at least I have to take a nap and wake up again. You understand? My head is filled up. Like, I've been here just relaxing. You know, I said I'm going to come back again on live stream. I will be doing like 4 live stream today. Like 4 live stream. I will be doing 4 live stream today. That is what I want to be doing. Like, instead of me to be offline, I'll just do the live stream. So that is it. Oh, Big Uncle Fly, I sent you a message. I don't know if you check my message out. I sent you a message earlier. I will check one.
Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the house of
Yeah, that is it. Sometimes it's good. Well, you know, I've been on so much, and it's like, I've been on this.
My part was to sound the alarm.
I've been on this.
Even if they hated me. When I say to the wicked, you shall surely die.
So I also have to relax. Like, my mood is not really. So I have to relax. Maria says, Fly, remember. So, you know, Maria, sometimes you just can just decide to like draft up to sleep, you know. But you know, my mood, I don't really like my mood. I don't like my mood.
It was to proclaim. God knew the people. He knew they would not listen to me. He knew their hearts were hardened. But even so, he sent the warning, not because of them, but because of